The newspapers. The newspapers that appear in the intro of each episode seem to reference the period of the American Civil War, the mid to late 1800s, foreshadowing some of the later references we saw about the Civil War from the very first episode of the show. I was able to identify the original print of the newspaper that appears on the intro of each episode. The paper seems to come from a South Carolina press and was printed in August of 1884, about 2 decades after the American Civil War. The paper references the Civil War as well as events that eventually led to the death of the Russian Tsar Alexander II at the hands of the nihilist movement in Russia. An interesting piece of history is that Alexander II also supported the Union during the American Civil War and had abolished serfdom or forced labor in Russia before the United States was able to abolish slavery. The paper also references multiple tragedies that took place during the time, including a column on the deadly spread of cholera throughout France. We should note that in my previous analysis, I explained multiple other clues in the show that connect to France, including Jade's comments about his grandmother. One article that caught my attention on this same page was titled Stories of Vampires, which talks about alleged reports of vampirism documented by a physician. The physician stated that one of his patients had the superstitious belief that a vampire was visiting him at night to suck the blood from one of his ankles. Additionally, the patient believed that the vampire was an old enemy who was deceased. The physician dismissed the patient's superstitions and sent him home, but the patient was never to be seen again after that. The physician further added that the patient was a native of Hungary, and such superstitions are common there. The latter reminded me of my previous analysis of the cave drawings made by the monsters, where I explained that the symbols used by the monsters match the old Hungarian runic script, and that the monsters more closely resemble the Draug or Scandinavian zombie, which is technically a type of vampire in the mythology. The same newspaper article goes in depth, stating that physicians were divided about the alleged reports of vampires and werewolves, and that there must be some type of scientific foundation for them. The article highlights how accounts of vampirism date back millennia, referencing the Greek myth of Lamia, a serpent-like demon who will devour children and seduce men with her beauty before devouring them as well, which I think also paralleled my analysis of the monster Jasmine during episode number 7, and how there seem to be aspects of the mythological snake as seductresses and hypnotizers that can be seen in the monsters. Additionally, the article states how some of the most notable reports of vampirism originate from France, citing the story of the Marshal Guy de Rays, who was charged and hung for the kidnapping and killing of approximately 200 children, even though the Rays confessed to having had at least 800 victims and having eaten several of them. The second newspaper from the show's intro appears to have been printed around July of 1920, 2 years after World War I, and the year that the Red Army succeeded in the Russian Civil War. As much as can be seen so far, the dates of the newspapers seem to range from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. One of the newspapers used by Victor also seems to have been printed around 1920. We can see an advertisement for Bell-Ann's indigestion pills in one of the newspapers used by Victor. Bell-Ann's were popular pills for indigestion during the late 1800s and beyond. The pills were developed by a chemist named Bell and John Lanphier Dodge, who was the son of a surgeon who served for the Union during the American Civil War. At this time, and based on all the available clues, it seems that the theme of war, specifically of the American Civil War, is central to the story of the show. It also seems that the producers may have creatively adapted real historical events and reports into the show's story. And the producers have definitely made an effort to allude to this throughout the show. An example of this is the notorious bell that Boyd rings at the beginning of episode number 1, which happens to match the classic school bell that was used during the period of the American Civil War. Another subtle background detail that is consistent with the time period can be found back at Colony House, where one of the design patterns we can see on the chimney is the clamshell or seashell design. Clamshell designs are still popular in modern furniture design, but were most popular during the mid-1800s and famously added to the rifle powder flask used during the American Civil War, among many other military items. If you're new to the channel and would like to see more content, please make sure to hit the notification bell, subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button. Till next time.